Hello, how are you? This time we need to talk through Isaiah chapter 40. And if you've been paying attention in the past in the youth group with the middle schoolers and the high schoolers, I said that Isaiah is more or less understood as breaking up into three parts. And this is going to be the start of the second part of it. So, as we've been meeting along throughout the early spring before all this, we were still in the first third of Isaiah, which is relatively negative, and there's a lot of prophecies and oracles of destruction, and that everything is going to lead into exile and everything's going to be terrible. Now, the second third of Isaiah, chapters 40 through about 55, take a very hopeful turn. And it's just, it kind of seems abrupt because of how dark the first 39 chapters were. But from chapters 40 to 55, they are understood as some of the most hopeful chapters in the entire Bible. And what better time to be reading some hopeful passages, am I right? But there's something brilliant that happens. Absolutely brilliant. And I've alluded to it, and I've tried to keep it a little bit of a secret before now. But in Isaiah 1 through 39, it leads up to saying everything's headed towards exile. You're terrible. Everyone's terrible. Destruction is coming. You're going to be exiled. And exile is bad because you're being kicked out of your home. You're being thrown into another culture with another language, and you won't have access to the old places and spaces and holy buildings that you used to. The temple's gone. And so exile was a massively disorienting time. But Isaiah does something fascinating. Now, before I read just chapter 40, can you guess the exile and the kicking out of the Israelites is going to be reinterpreted in chapters 40 through 55? Reinterpreted as what? I'll give you a hint. There's an Old Testament book that is titled the word I'm thinking of. What do you think? Here's another hint. Starts with the letter E. Exodus. So Isaiah does something fascinating, absolutely brilliant, and he leans into the prophetic tradition that he's supposed to be in, and he takes the worst circumstances possible and flips it on its head and says, your exile isn't an exile, it's actually a new exodus. Just like the Israelites leaving slavery and wandering in the desert before coming to the promised land. So Isaiah does something what Walter Brueggemann calls the prophetic imagination, is that he reinterprets the future in a creative way that is guided by hopefulness and singing rather than just by despair and lament. So I'm going to read chapter 40. And as we read it, pay attention to the most hopeful verse that you think happens in that whole chapter. Now, you're going to be watching this on YouTube. What I would love for you to do is leave a comment of what you think is the most hopeful verse. And if you have a Bible at home, pull it out. I'm going to read from the NIV, but if your translation is a little different, that's totally fine. Just leave a quote or leave a comment with what you think is the most hopeful verse in chapter 40. And remember, it's about changing the understanding of the exile, turning on its head and making it into a new exodus. So instead of being sent into slavery and into the unknown, it's actually a matter of being liberated from something. All right, I'm going to read it. You hold up the corner and you flip through the pages like this. Isaiah, until you come to the title of the book, and then you get to the chapter. Here we go. I mean, even my superscript, it says comfort for God's people and mine. It's pretty wild. All right, here we go. Verse 1. Comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all of her sins. A voice of one calling, in the wilderness prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all people will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Well, this is different. A voice says, cry out, and I said, what shall I cry? All people are like grass, and their faithfulness is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flower falls because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever. You who bring good news to Zion, go up on a high mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up, do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. Ooh. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. I really like that one, verse 11. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breath of his hand marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Who can fathom the Spirit of the Lord and instruct the Lord as his counselor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him, and who taught him the right way? Who was it that taught him knowledge or showed him the path of understanding? It sounds like the closing chapters of Job. Am I right? Surely the nations are like a drop in the bucket. They are regarded as dust on the scales. He weighs the islands as though they were fine dust. Lebanon is not sufficient for altar fires, nor its animals enough for burnt offerings. Before him, all of the nations are as nothing. They are regarded by him as worthless and less than nothing. With whom then will you compare God? To what image will you liken him? As for an idol, a metalworker casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold and fashions silver chains for it. A person too poor to present such an offering selects wood that will not rot. They look for a skilled worker to set up an idol that will not topple. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. He brings princes to naught and reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground than he blows on them and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all of these? Who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. Oh, I like this. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is an everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary. and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Let's see. I'm gonna mark this. Oh wait, that's on for something else. Okay. This is the start of what is called by some scholars second Isaiah, because Isaiah can be understood as in potentially three parts, because it changes from like history to poetry to apocalyptic-esque type language and vocabulary. Comment to this what you think is a hopeful verse from chapter 40. As a recap, we can hear that it sounds like, have hope, God strengthens people, God has not been dethroned. And those are three really important things to remember as the Israelites are being sent off into exile. They have to go through this tricky task of reinterpreting it as though it's an exile, and they should not grow weary. God is still on the throne, and what is it? He gives strength and hope. So, I don't know how that relates to right now directly, but is there a way that we can see this current time, what we're dealing with right now, not as exile, but as an exodus? How do you think God is going to give hope, give strength, and prove that he hasn't been dethroned by all of this? And how can we interpret what we're currently going through, not as being displaced from our usual routine and being exiled into something, but how can we interpret what's going on right now as though it's a new exodus that has come about to help the people of God be liberated? Wow. That's a rhetorical question. I don't have an answer. I'm going to dwell on that for the rest of today, but I hope you do too, all right? So thank you for checking this out. And as usual, you are fantastic, beautiful, lovely. Thank you for listening, and may grace and peace be with you.